July 29th, 2026. FIFA announces a new company. On paper, it's worth $20 billion before it's signed a single new client. 3 days later, that company doesn't exist anymore, and the man who built it is now fighting in real time to keep his job. Here's the number that should actually worry you, not 20 billion. 55. That's how many countries UEFA represents, and every single one of them was prepared to boycott FIFA's own tournaments over this. Not protest, boycott. The World Cup walked away from by the confederation that includes most of the teams that make it worth watching. So, what did Gianni Infantino actually do that got 55 countries ready to torch the relationship? Here's the concept driving this whole story: the subsidiary workaround. It's an old move. You don't own something outright, so you can't just sell it, but you can build a new company next to it, put the valuable parts inside, and sell pieces of that instead. Nobody technically sold anything they weren't allowed to sell. The problem is, everyone who has a say in the original thing usually notices, and they tend to ask the same question. Who gets to say yes? Okay, let's say you're on the board of something you don't fully control alone. A co-op, a homeowners association, a family business with cousins who all inherited equal shares. You can run the day-to-day. You can hire, spend within budget, make the calls that don't require a vote. But there's a line. Big structural moves, selling an asset, bringing in outside owners, changing who has power, those need everyone's sign-off. Now let's say you find a workaround. You spin off a piece of the business into a new entity. You don't technically need a vote for that, not on paper. And then you quietly line up outside investors for the new entity before anyone else in the room even knows it exists. Turns out the other owners find out anyway, and they don't care that it was technically legal. They care that you didn't ask. That's the mechanism. Now here's how it actually played out, with FIFA's 211-member federations standing in for your cousins. On July 29th, FIFA announced FIFA Forward Enterprise, FFE for short, a brand new subsidiary, fully owned by FIFA, built to house the commercial side of the business: broadcast rights, sponsorships, ticketing, licensing, and the operational running of tournaments like the World Cup. The plan was to sell up to 20% of FFE to outside investors. JP Morgan put the implied valuation at $20 billion. At that number, a 20% stake works out to roughly $4.2 billion raised. The deal had real infrastructure behind it. JP Morgan bankers built it. Greg Maffei, the former CEO of Liberty Media, a guy who spent decades structuring sports and media companies, signed on as commercial advisor. And the expected lead investor was Thrive Eternal, a long-term investment fund run by Thrive Capital. Thrive Capital was founded by Joshua Kushner. His brother is Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner's father-in-law is the sitting US president, who just spent the summer standing next to Infantino at World Cup events on American soil. FIFA's pitch was simple. This money flows back into the game. The existing member development program pays each of FIFA's 211 federations $8 million per 4-year cycle. Under the FFE plan, that number jumps to $20 million for the next cycle, then 22, then 24 million in the cycles after that. On the surface, that's a bigger check for the smallest federations on Earth. A federation running a national team, youth academies, and coaching programs on $8 million over 4 years suddenly gets 2.5 times that. That's not a rounding error. That's the difference between a program that survives and one that actually grows. So why did it collapse in 3 days? Because the confederations weren't looking at the check. They were looking at who'd been asked to approve it. UEFA rejected the plan outright. So did CONCACAF. UEFA went further, putting out a statement that the World Cup, quote, cannot be treated as an investment product, end quote, and threatening to boycott FIFA competitions entirely if it moved forward. 3 days after announcing FFE, Infantino scrapped it. Then things got worse. Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of England, a man who'd literally stood next to Infantino at World Cup events all summer, said Infantino had committed what he called a fatal governance failure, specifically because he didn't consult his own senior advisors before announcing the deal. FIFA responded by flying senior staff to a crisis meeting in Rabat, Morocco. FIFA's own statement said mistakes were made, not whose. Secretary General Matthias Grafström and the management board members in the room said they still backed Infantino, which is exactly the kind of statement you put out when the backing isn't actually guaranteed. Here's the thing. Selling stakes in sports to private capital isn't new, and it isn't controversial by itself. The NFL started allowing teams to sell up to 10% to approved private equity firms back in 2024. MLB allows a single fund to hold up to 15% of a club, with total outside ownership capped around 30%. The NBA and NHL cap total private ownership at 30%, with individual funds capped around 20%. In every one of those leagues, there's a commissioner, there are owners, and there's an established process for approving a sale. The money comes in through a door that's already built. FIFA doesn't have that door. And here's the part that actually matters. This isn't even the first time Infantino has tried to move fast around it. Go back to October of 2023. FIFA needed to award hosting rights for the 2034 World Cup. Infantino restricted eligible bids to Asia and Oceania, citing continental rotation, and gave interested federations roughly 25 days to submit. Australia, the only other country that had shown interest, pulled out, later saying the timeline had caught it by surprise. That left Saudi Arabia as the sole bidder, backed by a technical evaluation score of 419.8 out of 500, the highest in World Cup bidding history. In December 2024, FIFA's Congress confirmed Saudi Arabia as host. Unanimously, 211 members, 0 recorded dissent, the first uncontested World Cup award since 1930. Swiss governance expert Marc Pieth has studied FIFA's internal structure for years. He said he was stunned that nobody challenged the process in court. Under FIFA's own statutes, member federations are the only ones with standing to do it. Not one of them used it, so notice the pattern. Narrow the room, move fast, present the outcome as inevitable before anyone organizes against it. It worked in 2023. Nobody sued, nobody boycotted. It's not that Infantino suddenly changed his approach in July 2026. It's that this time, the room he was narrowing included UEFA, the one confederation with enough combined leverage to actually say no and make it stick. Now there's a real disagreement buried in here, and it's worth taking seriously instead of flattening it. One read, FFE was always about the smaller federations. $20 to $24 million a cycle actually changes what's possible for a national program that's been running on 8. Under this read, Infantino's mistake was procedural, not moral. He had the right idea and skipped a step he'd gotten away with skipping before. The other read is less generous. Outside investors don't take a 20% stake in something and stay passive forever. Returns on $4.2 billion mean pressure on broadcast deals, on ticket pricing, on which tournaments get expanded to generate more inventory to sell. Under this read, the money goes back to the game was true on day 1 and gets harder to guarantee on year 5. And then there's the harder question the 2034 precedent raises. If narrowing the room worked before, why call this one a mistake at all? Maybe it wasn't a governance failure. Maybe it was a bet that worked the first time and didn't the second. A sovereign hosting decision and a foreign stake in FIFA's own commercial revenue aren't the same kind of ask. Even if the playbook looks identical from the outside, both of those can be true at once. That's usually how it works with money and power at this scale. And then there's the Rabat meeting itself. Was that a genuine show of confidence in Infantino, or a room full of people who need March's election to go smoothly and can't afford public chaos before it? Nobody outside that room actually knows. FIFA says one thing, the timing says another, so here's what actually happened, stripped down to the mechanism. 1. A leader treated a body that requires consensus like it only required notification, and had done it successfully enough times before to believe it would work again. 2. Outside capital's incentives got built into the structure before the people who'd have to live with those incentives were in the room. 3. The failure wasn't visible until the vote that mattered. UEFA's, CONCACAF's, nearly didn't go his way in 2023. Nobody in the room had the combined weight to push back. In 2026, somebody finally did. That's not just a FIFA story. That's the shape of almost every governance failure inside an institution that's supposed to run on consensus. The breakdown isn't usually in the plan. It's in who got asked, and when and how many times you can skip that question before the wrong room finally notices. Who gets to say yes? That's the whole story. Every time this happens in every organization that pretends to be a democracy until someone's in a hurry. Infantino is still FIFA president. The FFE plan is dead, for now, and the election that decides whether he stays is in March. Whether the Rabat meeting was real support, or a bridge to buy time until that vote, that's genuinely not settled yet. Maybe it's both. Maybe the confederations that said no this time say yes to a redesigned version next year, once he's actually asked first. Either way, Watch what happens the next time FIFA needs money or needs a vote on anything structural. Watch whether the ask comes before the announcement or after. That's usually how you find out if anyone actually learned anything.